Okay, thank you all for coming. You'll be challenged to listen to the first presentation in English, so sorry about that. So I want to talk about the demand for big data and analytics, and I think it's highest today than it's ever been. I've been with IDC for 12 years, consulting and advising on business analytics, and we have never seen this kind of demand like we have seen today. So in the past, this topic was only discussed in trade publications, and now you can read Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, The Economist, and you can see articles about big data and analytics almost every week. So there's a lot more popularity, a lot more executives are asking their IT departments what they should be doing about big data, why they're not doing something that their competitors are doing. So there's a lot of demand, and there's also a lot of confusion and fear to some extent. So if my organization is not investing in this technology, maybe our competitors are, and if we don't, we will fall behind. So there is quite a lot of demand. In 2011, the last full year, worldwide, $31 billion was spent just on business analytics software. About 35 to 40% of that in Europe, and I think you'll hear more specifically about the Spanish market from Jose later today, IDC's views on the market. We find that about 75% of organizations, and this is North American data, plan to invest in business analytics. So these are the larger companies with 500 or more employees. And there's a lot of new venture capital, going into startups. So in March, when we calculated this, $500 million, $500 million was invested in new startups. That's a lot of money going into companies that are, in many cases, doing many similar things. So many of these companies will go out of business. Some will be acquired by larger organizations, and a few of them will become successful on their own. But that's quite a lot of new companies coming into the big data and analytics. Everybody wants to be part of this market. So there is high demand, but there's also high confusion. 74% of organizations say that defining business requirements is the biggest challenge. So they know, they have heard about the new technology. Maybe it's Hadoop, maybe it's some of the NoSQL databases, some of the other analytic technologies, but they don't always know where to apply this data. What are the new of measuring business? What are the new ways of measuring performance? What are the new tools maybe to provide to analysts and with deep analytic expertise, with experience in statistical analysis and data mining? And 25% say that deciding what data is relevant is a big challenge. So this is, maybe it's good for storage companies, because more and more companies are collecting and storing everything. Everything that they're collecting, everything that is digitized, so that they can potentially analyze it later. And sometimes it's used for analysis, sometimes it's used for compliance with government regulations, sometimes it's used for operational efficiency. But increasingly, companies are storing more and more data. So that's good for maybe storage companies, but it's sometimes difficult in all this avalanche of data to understand what is really relevant and what matters. And when we ask what people mean by big data, so we have an IDC definition about very large volumes of data, high variety of data, so multiple structured data. There's text, there's audio, video, web logs, traditional operational data. And then there's high velocity data, so it's things that are coming at you streaming, like in financial trading systems, or systems that monitor cars or trucks or airplanes. So something that happens in real time. And when we ask, what does big data mean to you, 40% of respondents still look at this as the large volume of data, so terabytes or petabytes of data. But we also see that people do, the second highest response is for a variety of data. So more and more organizations are combining different types of data. They're not just looking at their operational data, they're adding data from social media sites, looking at what people are talking about, what are they saying about their products, what are they saying about recommendations, the product recommendations, who are influential products. So, for example, if an organization wants to find out who are my best customers, that is a very relatively simple query to run. If you're asking, who is my top 10 customer in terms of sales, but maybe you want to find out who is my, who's in my top 10 in terms of sales, but also who is very influential. Because sometimes somebody may not be in the top 10 of sales, but could be very influential, and their network of people contribute to the sales. So that is a much more difficult query, because now you have to do text analysis to find out who is influential. What kind of metrics do you use to find out who is influential in the market? For that, you need text analysis, network analysis. You maybe need different technologies, text mining technology, graph databases that you will combine with your operational data. So a couple of other things here. Let me close that. A couple of other challenges. Data integration and data quality are still #1 challenges. So I said I've been at IDC for 12 years, and this problem is there throughout this time as number one challenge. And this is where maybe many consulting companies spend most of the time. So in a typical business analytics or big data project, expect about 70 to 75% of the time and budget to be spent here on data integration. If you don't get this right, then everything else becomes irrelevant. And I think that problem will continue to get bigger as we see more and more different data sources coming together. And then finally, it's important, insufficient number of analytics and IT staff with appropriate skills. So more and more companies are finding that they don't have the right people to do the analysis, and they don't have the right IT staff with knowledge of some of the newer technologies. Hadoop would be one example, and the related technologies, some of the newer programming languages to program MapReduce code, for example. That is starting to change a little bit. Many universities are reacting now and starting new programs to address this shortage. And new tools are coming to market that simplify the process of interacting with some of the new technologies, where you may just be able to use your SQL skills and SQL analysts to use the newer technologies. Another interesting point is when we ask about return on investment. So these are two different studies that we did on return on investment. We see that most companies, when they invest in business analytics and big data, get their return within a year, and even faster, 6 months or 3 months. But half the organizations say that it's too difficult to find out what the return is, or they don't know how to do that. So either you get your return immediately, or you don't know what's going on at all. Right? So, and that is a big problem, because if you are, many of these projects are incremental, so you do small projects at a time. And if you don't know how to measure the benefits, there's benefits such as cost reduction, but then there's more difficult benefits to measure in terms of growing sales or better ways to interact with customers. If you can't do that, it will be very difficult to get funding for new projects. And that's one challenge that we're seeing in the market today. So if we look at big data, what does it mean to us today? It's the full stack of technology, from infrastructure for servers, storage, networking technologies, data organization and management technologies, including traditional databases and newer technologies, analytics and discovery tools, and then various prepackaged applications. Worldwide, this market is expected to be around $7 billion this year, growing at 40% compound annual growth rate. So very fast-growing market segment. But I think it's important to put it into perspective. So this is sort of the ratio of software to hardware to services in big data, and these are worldwide numbers. If you look at it in relation to all of business analytics, you see that it's a very, very small space still. Yeah? So this market has existed for maybe 30 years now. Since mid-'70s, there were packaged technologies for business analytics total. And now we have this new fast-growing segment of big data. Yeah? And there's a lot of overlap. There's some areas that are completely net new. And this market is growing at about 10%, and that is growing at the big data market is growing at about 40%. So you see the difference there. Where are we seeing investments? I think there are three ways to look at where companies are investing today. One is activity. Some of it is just access to information. So we see that in publishing, in media companies where they need to find information, and they're not doing a lot of traditional analysis in many cases. Not all cases, but they need to find information. So traditional media companies. The second case would be analytics. So this is what we're talking about, throughout the day today. Data mining, multidimensional analysis, data visualization, some of the techniques for analyzing data. And third is operational. So there are big data use cases that are very much operational. For example, using new databases like MongoDB or Cassandra to run a website or run your email system. So these are a minority of cases, but they do exist today. And then we look at use cases by business function or business process. So it could be marketing, sales, finance, risk management, supply chain operations, and by industry, and then specific industry. So where we're seeing quite a bit of investment is in retail, in both online and offline retail, analyzing customer behavior and combining online and offline data streams. We're seeing it in financial services and risk management. We're seeing it in government, in fraud detection, in local law enforcement, increasingly police departments using technologies to predictively understand where to put police officers, for example, on the streets. Warranty management, so this is manufacturers and retailers looking at social media, for example, to figure out, are there potential problems with the product? Are people on social media sites saying something about my product that can help me identify a problem before I find out with all the people returning maybe a defective product? And then in healthcare, we're seeing increasing investment in patient data analysis, trying to improve outcomes for healthcare. This is a very active space for this market. But the examples are across all industries, all company sizes, and across the world in all regions. I mentioned earlier, so there are different technologies to support this. It's not all about Hadoop. Hadoop is a big area, and it's in fact an ecosystem of different technologies. There are open source technologies that are becoming very popular, and many companies are experimenting more with open source technologies. And for each of those major open source projects, there is a commercial company that helps support that project. In many cases, commercial enterprises are not willing to go into production with open source technology. And so both established technology companies that are represented here today, as well as some of the newcomers, are supporting those open source projects. And then there are different areas. There's the traditional relational database management systems. There are predictive analytics and visualization tools. There are different types of databases that some have existed for many years but are now becoming more popular. Object-oriented databases, graph databases. And this is not a complete list, it's just a sample. So there's XML databases. There are other types of technologies. And high-speed streaming technologies, such as complex event processing, for example, are becoming more and more popular. And here you have maybe, other than some of the bigger companies like IBM and Microsoft, you have some of the smaller vendors who focus specifically on search and enterprise search and text mining. And these are, so this world of content analysis, text analysis, and data analysis has existed in parallel for many years, and people usually have experience or one or the other. And now we're seeing more unified information access and analysis where the two areas come together. So you're combining structured data and unstructured data increasingly. Again, the examples of companies are just examples. There are many more for each category, so you get a sense of what kind of players are in there. Let me talk a little bit about what we advise our customers. So I think one thing to recognize is that all of this big data, there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of hype. The reality is that it all has to tie to business value, whether it's return on investment or total cost of ownership. And there are three primary drivers for investment today that we're seeing: optimization, innovation, and control. A lot of focus in the media is on innovation. So what can we do with big data technology to create new products, to create new services, find those interesting pieces of information that were not possible before. But actually, a lot of more investment is going into optimization. So making focus on cost control, focus on making sure that the products get to the destination faster, better. So there's less damaged products being produced. Different ways of retaining customers for telecommunications companies, for example, or banks. And then there's also control, which is a real driver, fraud detection, security, managing security of that data. I think you'll hear about that later today. Compliance with government regulations. This is what many executives think about the most. It's fear of not complying that often drives of this investment, and that's a key area in the market. So for each of these, there are different things to consider. It's not all about technology, and I think that's, obviously, maybe it's obvious, but it's a very important point. I think we get sort of caught up in the discussions about technology, some of the newer technology types, but it's also about people and data and process and what we call intent. So how do we set the strategy for business analytics? How do we find sponsorship? How do we justify so we can figure out what a return is on that investment? I mentioned the people issues around what skills are required, what's the organizational structure. We find that increasingly companies are setting up separate groups. Sometimes they call them competency centers. Sometimes they call them innovation labs to focus on big data. And these include professionals that focus on data integration, data quality, data warehousing in all its forms. And then the analysts are usually in different business groups aligned with those particular business processes because they need to be closer to business. With data, the data has to be relevant, it has to be there at the right time, has to be complete, or it's not going to be used. And increasingly we see lines of business going out, if they're not being satisfied by the IT department, going out and getting their own solutions, whether it's cloud services, software as a service, or buying their own software in many cases. We see that as the global recession started, we saw more and more of that. IT increasingly losing control in many cases, and users demanding more self-service. And that has remained true. I think it will be the new normal for this market. So I think it's important to, again, consider all those areas. And when we talk about it, it's also important then to measure your performance against it. So on each of these areas, you can measure how good you are, and the idea is that you should be expanding in parallel for all of them. You become, you could be an expert in data analysis, but you don't have the right technology, so you're a beginner in technology. And we see many companies like that have the different levels of expertise for the different measures of those 5 measures. And sometimes you ask business side, and they will respond one way. Then you ask IT, and they will respond in a very different way. And then so the reds and the yellows there, and then you see that there is a disconnect or very different expectations and understanding of what goes on in one organization. And that's obviously opportunity for change and opportunity for improvement. So we're doing this type of work to assess individual companies and then to compare companies within an industry and against peers maybe in other industries. So I was given 20 minutes. Let me finish up with this last slide. Some of the future things, future outlook, future things to think about that are happening in this country. I mentioned already shortage of skills. This is a very real issue. And I think many organizations are finding themselves in a position that they don't have the right people. They can either retrain existing people. They can sometimes find people in their companies that were not used properly in the past. And they also increasingly go out to other consulting firms. So we're seeing more and more consulting firms coming up that are focused on analysis of data. I think we're also seeing that the distinction between technology and consulting and content firms is sort of going away, and same companies are providing all the same services. So you have some of the larger technology and traditional technology and consulting firms now getting into each other's business. So you may be able to get more of the complete services package from a single vendor. I mentioned venture capital. So in the next couple of years, we expect there to be more mergers and acquisitions. Some of the startups will probably be combined with the larger companies. All go out of business, and a few might survive on their own. And I think another reality here is that there's a lot of talk about Hadoop, but it is not today replacing relational databases. So there's coexistence with existing data warehouses and search and analytics technologies, and they're used in a complementary way. So you may be pre-processing data, especially weblog data in Hadoop, and it may be then that pre-processed data set may be going into a traditional analytics server for more in-depth analysis. So we see quite a bit of that happening today. Value-based pricing and transaction-based pricing. So we see examples of where the technology is sold not based on annual subscription or per user license, but based on transactions. So we see that in fraud detection. We see that in some of the marketing cases and advertising cases where each recommendation is a transaction and is priced as a single unit. So depending on how many recommendations you do, that's how you pay for the technology. And then final 2 points here is we think that there are obviously differences here, especially in North America and Europe, but there's a new generation of consumers that are increasingly willing to give up their privacy to share information online, and I think that creates more and more of the big data that can be analyzed, that can be used to provide services to those consumers. And finally, a little bit more long-term, we see growing commercial use of artificial intelligence and question and answer systems. So these are systems that allow you to ask questions in free format, and then the system responds back with a precise answer. So instead of analysis done by the humans, analysis is done completely by the systems, and the response is either a precise answer or recommendation of answers, and basically sort of statistical analysis of likelihood or probability of that happening. So quick 20 minutes. If you have additional information, you can contact me directly or through my colleagues here in Madrid. And you'll hear more specifics about the Spanish market a little bit later today.